Hello, everyone. Welcome to AI4. Our led by Dan DeMers, CEO and co-founder of Cinchy. Please join me in welcoming Dan to our virtual stage.
Hey, everybody.
All right, it's all yours, Dan.
Thank you. Now you're looking very choppy. I'm hoping I'm looking okay to others. I don't know if that's on my side or your side, but hopefully everyone can see me and hear me okay. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. So I'm going to be talking about the end of integration and how a data fabric can turbocharge your AI transformation. When I was younger, I had very fond memories of a game that may be familiar to all of you. I used to call it the detangler. It's a game where you put your headphones in your pocket and you take it out when you want to listen to music, only then to spend the next 10, 15 minutes attempting to untangle your headphones. I liked it so much, I became quite good at this. I developed a kind of a specialty and found that I was able to apply that skill at scale by working in a bunch of big banks in IT, delivering enterprise systems where if any of you have the same experience, you'll either enjoy or despise having spent half of your entire time and career essentially moving data around and playing the game of where is the data, find the data. I think one of the reasons why I enjoyed it so much is it reminded me of my childhood again, where I used to really enjoy the Where's Waldo series. So finding your data is akin to finding Waldo. Let's see if we can find him. Oh, there he is. So what is the problem? Why is all this data tangled? It's been tangled for decades and it doesn't seem to be getting any better. It's apps. They're evil. They trap and they silo all of our data. They also force us to do this really wacky thing called integration. And that integration is what burns half of our IT budget for every project, every year over year. It doesn't seem to be going away. And that's because there's not been a technology that's even attempted to make that go away. My grandpa used to say that apps lead to integration, integration leads to complexity, and complexity leads to collapse. Think about that. Complexity leads to collapse. If you've ever read any of the work of Joseph Tainter, you'll know the theory of how complexity has caused entire societies to collapse. It's an interesting phenomena that as you get started with something new, by adding more complexity, you get more benefits, and you get kind of addicted to that. And but what happens is that complexity starts to turn on you, and the benefits start to work against you. And if you're not careful, if you don't disrupt that trend, it will cause collapse, whether that collapses a society or your business or your career. It's definitely something that you don't want to be over that peak. And I know just from my experience, one of the reasons why I did what I did is because I felt like it was over that peak for the organizations I was at, for myself, and for the world. So there's an urge to simplify and start to untangle all of this. And there's a quote that I love from Steve Jobs that simple can be harder than complex. You have to work hard to get your thinking clean and make it simple, but it's worth it in the end. And once you get there, you can move mountains. And one of the greatest sources of inspiration, if you're thinking about simplicity, is nature. Richard Feynman, another quote that I really like is the imagination of nature is greater than the imagination of man. Take the human brain as an example. It's fascinating. As I've been working on Cinchy now for a number of years, I've become quite a big fan of the human brain, and there's some interesting facts that I picked up that I want to share with you that not everyone seems to know. The first is that, and I was shocked at this, but it kind of makes sense, is that your brain, like every one of you, it manages more data than the biggest company on the entire planet, and substantially more. Also, every time you're learning something new, whether you're a child learning to walk or learning something in later stages of life, it's your brain is forming new connections. It's physically altering itself. It's not just adding. otherwise things would start to pop out of your head. It's reorganizing itself. It's defragging the disk. It's subtracting as much as it's adding. It's rewiring. It's optimizing. And there's some beauty in the simplicity of that approach. But if you contrast that to, say, a data model inside of an app-specific database, that model doesn't really evolve. It's very rigid. It's very brittle. And the reason we don't continuously refine that is if you do, you break things, and then you have a production issue. So you tend to leave things alone, and you kind of work around, and you add and add and add, continuously building houses of cards on top of houses of cards, and so on and so forth. So this idea of rewiring as it goes is amazing. And related to that is the results of a study that was actually just published a few years back, where they found that people with higher IQ have fewer connections between the neurons. Not more connections, but fewer connections. So if you think about that, the efficiency of the pathways of the network is highly related to your intelligence. And if you apply that again to data, the efficiency of your pipelines, of how your data is connected, is equivalent to your company's intelligence. And the final point that's also equally interesting is that change doesn't stop. It continues from the data from in advance of the date of birth to the end of your life. It never stops. So if we apply these concepts to data, just imagine the order of magnitude simplification and scalability and just overall intelligence that we would gain from that. And that's a big reason why there's a ton of hype around this idea of a data fabric. So if any of you follow Gartner and Forrester and G2 and other leading analysts, there's a lot of conversations about this. It's approaching that kind of peak hype cycle. So you should be a little bit careful when we're entering that stage. But there's a reason why it's gotten a lot of attention, especially in the recent past. And it's a direct result of a really long-standing, and I mean really long-standing. Like we've been doing integration for 40 years since Oracle introduced the relational database in 1979, which was the beginning of the end of monolithic mainframes and the kind of the age of an app for everything, i.e. a database for everything, and integration for everything. And the digitization needs is just growing in terms of urgency, and COVID is an example of that. But it started prior to COVID. But that's just put a sense of urgency that everything needs to be digitized, and it needs to be digitized now. So the growth of data sources, the ever growth of data volumes, just continuously compounding complexity is just not sustainable. And on the other side of that, you have growing demands for real-time insights. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you our own data fabric that is built on our own platform, Cinchy. So I'll show you what that looks like if you've never seen a data fabric before. So let me pop out of this. And now this is our environment. We happen to be running this in a private cloud. Today we're in one cloud provider. We just moved over from another cloud provider. We can kind of lift and shift and relocate our entire fabric. We could move it on-prem if we wanted to. We have total control over that. But I'm going to come back and show you some of the other capabilities when we talk about some specific use cases and best practices. But what I'm doing is I'm rendering a visual of the active metadata that is only limited based on what I, Dan, have access to see for my company's private data fabric. So you have to think of it as a network, and networks have LANs, they have WANs, and you have internets and World Wide Webs. Similar concepts. Data fabric is really a network-based architecture applied to your data. But what you're seeing is all of our company's knowledge, again, limited by what I have access to. So there very well could be data that's in the fabric that I do not have the ability to see or change or approve or delete. But if I zoom out, you're seeing all of our company's knowledge. And it's obviously not just a bunch of random circles here. If I zoom in, like, what are we actually looking at? What you're seeing is data sets. And you're seeing how those data sets all connect and relate to each other. So there's our employees data set as an example, and it's larger because it's connected more so than some of the other objects, like, for example, companies. So the larger it appears, the more mass, the more of a gravitational pull. And there's an interesting phenomenon. You watch the schema evolve over months and quarters and years. And that employees data set is a node that's this mustard color, because it's part of our human resources data fabric. So think of that as a subnet on an overall network of interconnected data. So that has all the things that you would expect in an HR kind of ecosystem. But what's powerful about this is not only is that our HR data fabric, everything from employees and performance reviews and compensation and stock options, like everything about them is here. But it's just connected to others. So there's our finance subnet. There's our compliance subnet. So within compliance, for example, we have policies, and policies can be owned by an employee. So you can kind of see how it's like Google Maps, but the satellite view, and you're looking at your data. You're not looking at an actual representation of the world. It's the world of data. And this fabric is more than just, again, a visual. I can actually enter any data set in any table and see the data and even change the data, as simple as clicking on the circle and clicking on open. And I can ask any question of any of the data on this. Again, the only limitation is that I need access to that data. And the only, so it's this idea of universal controls coupled with universal access. Now, this fabric wasn't built in one shot. We never had a data fabric project. You're using the technology to deliver the projects that you're going to do anyways, but you're using the technology to accelerate that delivery. But the fabric is a byproduct of that new approach. So if I go back in time, because a data fabric will often have a time machine, I can see the day we started to use our own product to run our own company, January 29th, 2018, you're seeing essentially an empty universe, with the origin of the universe being the single table called tables, where the Big Bang happens and these tables all live as data inside of this table's table. It's what we call a meta architecture. And then as we go forward through time, you can see our business is evolving. This is when we were a much earlier stage, but we're starting to hire. We're getting some customers, building some sales teams, and as we go through time, the fabric itself is really, again, the byproduct of using the overall solution, which I'll show you more about in a minute, to enable the delivery of business capabilities, where the fabric is just this byproduct. It's this beautiful kind of intended consequence of accelerating the projects. And as you go forward through time, there's more connectivity of your data. You're essentially not being driven by your data, you're driving your data, which is the only way you would ever be able to trust it. So we're in total control through the entire journey. And that's ultimately what a fabric enables is the ability for your organization to work in a collaborative way, while upping the game on controls, but enabling the organization to leverage projects for the betterment of the project, but to create the single view of everything, 360 everything, kind of along that journey. So let me go back. So that was just a quick sneak peek. So what is the difference here? The difference that we've been really applying to connecting applications for literally decades, using this integration-based approach, is on the left side. So you're seeing here as an example 2 applications, and we're adding 2 new applications, but we also have existing APIs and microservices, and we're deploying machine intelligence in the form of AI and ML. Well, the traditional approach is, of course, you're going to connect the apps to each other over APIs. There's no question about that. But behind the apps, be them micro apps or macro apps or microservices, behind all of this is always data. There's very few applications that don't use data or store data or generate data. Very few of them. Maybe some games or something, but in a business context, absolutely not. So as you're delivering these solutions, you need to connect that data. And the myth of microservices, where you define your service boundaries kind of perfectly to never enable the need to share data across, is just a pipe dream. Data doesn't work that way. It's incredibly connected. As you can see from even our fabric, there are very few kind of orphan nodes. It's all connected. So it's actually impossible to do that at scale. So you end up building APIs for integration, ETLs for integration, data virtualization, master data management, all these technologies to build these lines and to build more and more of them. The more apps you add, the more lines you have. And where I come from, a line is 100K. Whereas on the right, it's when you introduce the data fabric, that circle in the middle, what it's really doing is enabling this new capability that we call data collaboration, where, again, you're applying that network-based architecture where existing apps can connect once not to each other app, but through the fabric. And in the same way that if you get a new computer for your home, you attach it to your Wi-Fi, and through that one connection, you can send me an email, you can send your spouse a text message, you can communicate with billions of people, but you don't have to build billions of APIs or billions of ETLs. So a network-based architecture has proven itself over and over again: telegraph, telephone, internet, World Wide Web, social networks. But the application of that concept of data is actually quite new. So you can imagine the order of magnitude simplification that that's going to bring when you think about deploying machine intelligence. Now, our product goes beyond a base data fabric. Like, of course, the data fabric is there, which is really the software that facilitates the interconnectivity of data and mapping it to a canonical representation of that data that you can build as you go and you deliver projects. Where we start to differentiate, there's really three core elements there. The first is the one that I'm always most excited about, is what we call autonomous data. So you've heard of autonomous vehicles, which is driverless cars, where it's handing the control away from the human driver and turning that over to the software. Where autonomous data is actually the exact reverse of that, because today humans don't control data, it's the software that controls the data. We use apps, and apps are code, and the code is the user of data. So when we talk about autonomous data, it's the de-apping of that data. It's enabling the data to live outside of an app, and it's under human control, not under software control. So that's what autonomous data is. The ability to create what we call application experiences, which are really apps, but minus all the inner complexity of data storage and integration, and the ability to express logic and rules as data. And as you're building out your fabric, accelerating delivery, you're getting a universal interface, just like how you use a single app called a web browser to interact with all this content on the World Wide Web. Think of the data experience being the equivalent, but for the web of data that's under control. Again, with the only limitation being you're only able to see and change and touch and feel what you've been granted access by whoever ultimately owns that actual data. So I want to show you a couple of other examples. So I'm going to go back into the product. And I'm going to show you a couple of different examples. So the first is, this is actually something that we built specifically for demo purposes, but it does work, and it's similar to what our customers deploy in various contexts. But it's a nice little example of what you can do with a data fabric. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a couple of what we call experiences. Experiences is really skins that sit atop the fabric. And then I'm going to open up the underlying data structure. I'm just opening them in separate tabs. So the first experience is really for a retail customer of the hypothetical Cinchy bank to be able to apply for a mortgage. So no big deal. It's single sign-on. This would plug into, if we were actually a real digital bank, it would plug into our customer-facing experience, web, mobile, etc. Works seamlessly, but it knows who I am. It's as I submit my application, it's using the fabric as its sole source of data and its sole persistence layer of the data. So I submit the application. Now that application is on the fabric, and a second experience that is not for me as the applicant, but for, let's say, a loan officer at the bank, is able to then see those applications. And this is yet another experience. This is another skin that you can build in really any technology. It's just plugging it into the fabric, which takes care of the hard part of protecting the data, storing the data, managing the data, and implementing all the protections and controls. But if I open up a mortgage application, you can see the application. And all of the information is, of course, coming from the fabric, which may in turn be consolidating data from many other legacy sources. But what we've done here is we've enabled it to have income verification with the federal government. We've applied a real-time AI model to predict the probability that this particular individual and this application will ultimately end in default, and pulling the explainability directly back into the real-time interface, and ultimately I can approve or reject this. But what's interesting about this is just a skin. It's very light. It's just a front end. Behind the scenes, what you're seeing is the actual data set for the particular mortgages. And now I have a particular level of access in this particular environment, so I can see everything. But that's not true of any customer or of any loan officer or even of any software component, including any AI or ML model. But each row is a mortgage application. And let me look at the collaboration log where I can see the entire history of change of this individual application. So I can see that John Smith, the retail customer, submitted the application. I can then see that we plugged in an AI engine. In this case, we used H2O.ai, which is a pretty cool auto ML platform, but that's pluggable. You could plug in anything, like your homegrown, any other product. It can work seamlessly to operationalize your model. And what it did is very shortly after, because this was designed to be in an asynchronous enriched way, is it predicted the probability, pulled in the explainability, stored it as a JSON, and then Cinchy kicked in and essentially evaluated those predictions relative to all other mortgages and put it into a decile and provided a recommendation. In this case, it recommended that we reject this application, but then our human loan officer logged in a little bit later and overrode the machine and ultimately approved it. So you're getting the full lineage, the traceability of the single mortgage application, and the different skins, the different experiences. We saw the customer experience, we saw the loan officer experience, and now I'm showing you the data experience, because anyone can do that, including the loan officer. You don't have to go through the skin. The skin just kind of enriches that. But it's this idea of having people and systems and AI, legacy systems, cloud systems, everything all collaborating on data. And that's the magic of what the data fabric enables, is that seamless collaboration. So one thing to note is that a data fabric is not a data science platform. It's actually a platform for building experiences, what today you may call applications. So you're building, so there's a role of user called builders, who are essentially using the technology to create business capabilities, and to doing it, leveraging a connected data fabric kind of under the covers to enable that accelerated delivery. If you think of AI and models as your shiny new sports car, and you're excited to drive it, well, driving it without a fabric is kind of like driving it in the jungle, where you have to get out of the car and pull out your machete and clear a path, and then you have to push your car, and it's no fun to push your car, especially if there's no gas stations or charging stations. Try pushing it uphill in the middle of a jungle. You're gonna go very slow, even though the car is kind of cool. But with the data fabric, it's that infrastructure that's been missing. It's the highways, it's the charging stations, gas stations. It allows you to drive the car at full speed. So the car did come before the road, but hey, better late than never. So some of the do's and don'ts when thinking about a data fabric, because it is a new paradigm. The first is that I would strongly recommend that you accept that integration is not even just your AI bottleneck. It's your bottleneck for all things technology, but in the context of AI, which is what we're here to talk about, it's absolutely the bottleneck. Everyone, I think, recognizes that. But I think the key here is to actually do something about it. Don't just accept it, because there are solutions, and a data fabric is a perfect example of one that can actually change the game, move the needle, and actually solve the problem instead of just accepting it. The other thing that a fabric enables is the shifting away from a product-centric view. Like Agile's been the thing for a while, but Agile, product backlogs, those are application backlog. It really needs to be more data-centric, but it's the data centricity that then enables us to become truly business-centric. So one of the things that we've learned just in our own use and having our customers use that is that shift then enables you to turbocharge, because you're delivering outcomes as a project instead of product changes where you assemble them together to create an outcome. So you're a lot more intelligent in your sequencing. The next is make sure that you build on top of existing investments. Don't throw anything away. Leverage the fabric only if you're willing to change how you deliver future outcomes, and use it as the system of record, but not for existing data, because you already have systems of record. Connect those to the fabric, but use it for new data. And some of the don'ts: don't create a data fabric project. You should use it to deliver the projects that you're already planning, and with that immediate acceleration. Don't believe the hype. Be skeptical, but not closed-minded, and use it where the value is clear and the risk is acceptable. Don't rebuild things that you already have, and don't believe what any vendor says. Get them to show you live and get them to prove it to you. One of the things, if this is an interesting subject, we are going to be kicking off a learning series. So the link is on the screen. Feel free to take a screen grab. Love for you to join if you want to learn more about data fabrics, the concepts, some of the roadmaps, best practices, demos. We'll have special guests as well. And we're going to be starting this on September the 10th at 11:30 Eastern time. So it's cinchy.com/AI4, all lowercase. So hope to see you there. And again, my name is Dan. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Cinchy. And Cinchy is the end of integration. And let me just quickly see if there's any questions. Okay. So I just see the one question around metagraph based on metadata, not instance graph. So are we seeing metagraph based on metadata? So you are seeing that graph that you were seeing was based on metadata. It's active metadata where it was sliced based on the present view, because you can slice it based on the past view. So one of the characteristics that you should look for in data fabric is the idea of active metadata, where it is live, it's up to date as you're building structures and nodes, you're capturing business descriptions, data classifications, you're able to inspect that metadata and query it as if it's data, and apply even AI and ML to help you iterate and as you evolve your fabric and your model. So that's kind of a live view into the metadata, but with the ability to pop in to the actual data and be able to kind of seamlessly go between the metadata and the actual business data. Okay, so it looks like that's the only question. So thank you all very much, and hope to see you on our first session coming up on September the 10th. Thank you.